Hey everyone, it's Mark here. In this video, I'm going to be going over the Omega Speedmaster 3513.30. I'm going to go through my thoughts about it and just give you a general tour of it. And it's one that came on my radar because it's a relatively inexpensive Omega Speedmaster that is not terrible value. So hence why I'm going to go over it. Now if you think I missed anything, or if there's anything else you'd like me to cover, let me know that in the comments below, and obviously it would be great if you like the video and subscribe to the channel. And I'll leave some links to some random Omega Speedmasters that I rather like in the description below as well. Alright, so let's have a look at the watch. What we have here is the watch. Let's start off with some basics about the movement. So this is Omega's 1152 movement, which is really based on the ETA 7750, which has about 25 joules, and Omega reports a power reserve of 44 hours. This, however, has some conflicting information online, with it being reported a power reserve of 46 hours. In either case, you're basically seeing a generally pretty standard movement. It has a reported frequency of 28,800, which again is standard for decent quality watches. So we're seeing a pretty reasonable movement here, although nothing that is necessarily that surprising. And given the age of the watch, that probably should not surprise you either. We can also see here a chronometer, and we can see a date complication. And these generally work as you would expect. So the chronometer here, we can start it with this top button, and then it will obviously start moving along, and you can see that it sweeps relatively smoothly, and that again is not terribly surprising given the movement in question. And similarly, the second hand right here in the small seconds area also moves relatively smoothly. Now we can see the second hand from the chronometer moving around. We can also reset it with the bottom button, and it will snap back pretty quickly in most cases. So we'll stop it, and then we'll snap it back. And it snaps back quite smoothly. Let's see how that works again. So we'll just get it sweeping around, and you can see that it moves, like I said, smoothly enough. So we'll stop it, and then we'll snap it back. So it functions quite smoothly and quite efficiently. The second here as well is smooth. And that is what you would expect, but of course with small seconds, it is naturally going to look relatively smooth when it is all condensed. So that's effectively what we've got movement-wise. Again, good quality, but I wouldn't necessarily say anything particularly unusual. So what we can now do is we can start looking at the crown. So focusing now on the crown, what you'll see is kind of a pull-out crown here. So we'll need to pull it out, which I will do by using a car-sharing card here, because it is easier said than done when you've got gloves on to pull the crown out. And as you can see, I'm kind of struggling here, which kind of tells you that it can be a little bit annoying to set the time. So I've eventually gotten it out. So when we've got it out here, we can move the minute hand around. It moves smoothly enough. There's nothing particularly unusual. So let's just kind of smooth this around or move this around, and we'll see the date change over. Now, while I'm doing this, what you'll notice is the minute hand has some of the loom worn off, which is not exactly ideal, but nevertheless, that's kind of what you get when you get a used watch. And you can see right here that the date transitions around quite smoothly. Now, let's just set the time at some random time here. And now to set the date, using the quick date function, we'll need to push it in, and then you can move it around. And it moves quickly enough, and the date centers into the date slot, which again is what you would expect. It will only move one way, however, rather than two ways. So that's what we've got with the crown. Now, if we pull it all the way out again, we'll see if it has hacking. And you can tell that it does. And that basically is what we've got here, in terms of the movement and in terms of the crown. It is smooth. There's nothing that I would say is particularly unpleasant about it. It moves relatively quickly. I don't really get much resistance. So I would say that the crown and movement function quite well, particularly given the age. Now, granted, if you were to buy one of these, you would need to focus on the service quality before you were to actually pull the plug or pull the button or push the button or whatever the phrase is and actually buy it. So that's what we've got movement-wise. Let's have a look at what the watch looks like itself and then go over some of the aesthetics. Focusing in on the watch itself, we can look at the dial. Now, the dial itself is reasonably elegant. Now, it has effectively two concentric circles, so it has this smaller circle in the center, which is this polished silver, and going outside this center circle, we have a ring. The ring itself has a rather faint texture, but it looks like brushed steel from a bit of a distance. So the outside ring adds some texture and nuance to this. Then finally outside it, we have some additional markers around the outside, again in polished steel. So effectively getting some interest without it looking too busy. The actual time markers right here for the hours, they have some lume on them, but of course given the age, that isn't going to work perfectly. But again, they're relatively unobtrusive. Now if we focus again on the date section here, again that slots in quite nicely. The thing I like about it is it slots in neatly into this outer circle. So it's nicely aligned, basically. There's a degree of textural integrity in how it is put together. Furthermore, we can see this concentric circle theme continue through into the smaller areas here. We've got an inner circle, an outer circle, and then a final outer circle. So we're getting an echoing of the concentric circle type idea in each of these individual areas, which is going to be helpful in terms of what we're looking at with the watch here. So that, of course, is also nice in terms of the appearance. Now, if we turn the watch over, we can see the back of it is what you would expect from a normal Speedmaster. We have effectively at the back here this textured logo, which is what you would normally get. And then the Speedmaster comment here as well. There's a combination of polished and brushed steel, which is exactly what you would expect. On the side of the case, we have the crown here, which is a signed crown with the Omega logo on it, and obviously we just have polished buttons here for each of the chronometer functions. There's a bit of a combination of different types of steel as well, so in terms of the polished steel around the bezel, and also brushed steel around the rest of the case. The bezel itself, while we're on that topic, is again in this particular watch in good condition, but you do need to watch out for that when you're buying a used watch. This one is a little scratched, but it is not egregiously so. Some used watches are scratched and are very ugly. Now the bezel itself doesn't turn, but it gives you a bit of an idea about various things you might be looking at. Personally, I don't think I would ever actually ultimately end up using it, but that's another issue entirely. So that's what the bezel ultimately looks like here. And you can see that it kind of has this nice black text, which makes it relatively easy to read, even if you're not really that interested in its usefulness as a bezel. Now the bracelet itself is steel here. It has this sliding function at the back, so you slide it to effectively set it at a particular level, and then you close it by putting this hook into a hole here, and then it closes. To open it up, you effectively need to push side buttons on the side right here, and then it opens back up, which is relatively unsurprising for a bracelet. Now, the bracelet itself is not totally integrated, is the best way of saying it, which is good and bad. The bad part is it doesn't look as smooth as, say, AP or some Rolex bracelets. The good part of it is it is super easy to remove and replace. So, I mean, there's swings and roundabouts there. So that's effectively what the bracelet ultimately looks like and what we've got aesthetically. Overall, I think it's a nice watch. I think aesthetically it's pleasing, but it isn't necessarily my favorite watch. It looks nice, is pretty much what I would say. So let's have a look at what it's like on the wrist. Okay, so let's have a look at what it's like on the wrist. So to put it on here, you just need to put it on the wrist, and then you effectively need to put the hook into this hole here, and then you can close it up, which is easier said than done while you're trying to sort of monitor a camera and also put on a watch. But anyway, we got there eventually. It sort of does up reasonably well, and this is effectively what it looks like on the wrist. As for how it will go size-wise, my wrist is probably around the 7-inch area, give or take a little bit, and this works well for me. The case itself is 39mm, and that is probably a decent size for my wrist. Now, granted, some people might like larger watches. For me, this works well. However, it's going to depend a lot on the individual. I think the size is perfect for that wrist size. I wouldn't necessarily go larger, but again, that's a personal preference thing, as opposed to the watch-specific thing. Alright, so that's pretty much the Omega Speedmaster 3513.30. I think it's a decent option if you're in the market for a chronometer. It's not terribly expensive. However, there are some things to bear in mind, which is, of course, it is a little bit old, so you do want to check out the condition when you ultimately buy it. But nevertheless, I think it's a pretty decent option. So those are my views on it. If you think I've missed anything, or if there's anything else you'd like me to cover, let me know that in the comments below. And otherwise, of course, it would be brilliant if you'd like the video and subscribe to the channel.